Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be with all of you here tonight. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules after work to hang out and get nerdy, or in the case of Christabel, very, very late into the night to get nerdy. Um, and let's see, my journey. I am actually no longer working day to day with Salesforce. I'm exploring the world of DevOps, but I absolutely love the Salesforce community. And yeah, I first became a Salesforce admin in 2014. And the next year, I was taking a database programming class at a university. And at the same time in my day job, I was getting frustrated waiting for consultants to edit the Salesforce data editing automations that they'd programmed for us in Apex each time our business needs changed. So I also started studying how to program triggers and custom data entry user interfaces in Salesforce using Apex. Um, and then a few years later, point and click programming in Salesforce Flow got so good that you could almost argue that I wasted my time learning how to program by writing code. Um, but I really did enjoy studying a lot of computer science and software engineering at night while I was doing Salesforce administration by day, because I feel like it's given me kind of a hybrid perspective on these flowchart based point and click programming tools like Salesforce Flows, Zapier, If This Then That, MIT Scratch, and more that I'm really excited to share tonight. And just to be clear, this is a completely admin-oriented presentation, even though I'm talking about programming, because with Flow, we are all getting to program. My first opportunity to be exposed to some of tonight's ideas was when I learned to write code. But last time I checked, Harvard University had switched its introductory programming course to use flowchart-based point-and-click programming tools, just like Salesforce Flow. So I promise that these concepts are relevant, no matter how you're teaching a computer to do what you want it to do. So let's get started with a quick level set about what Salesforce Flow is. I would describe Flow more or less as a programming language that lets you do things in Salesforce when you run the programs that you wrote in it. But instead of writing code, you program Flow by building flowcharts inside of a tool called Salesforce Flow Builder with drag and drop elements. And there are three major kinds of flow that you can program with Flow Builder. The first one is called a screen flow, and these are interactive user interfaces that let humans control things in real time by clicking and typing. And so I think the best way to communicate that is to take a quick look at a screen flow that I built. So let's get things a little bigger. How is looking at the screen? Everybody see everything? All right, so I am in a Scratch org that I spun up. And oh, that's cute. All right, so I am in setup and I went to flows, and I'll just show off a screen flow I've got called Demo 01. And one of the things I actually want to show you about Demo 01 is if I go to the, oh, that is not what I meant to click. If I go to, maybe I shouldn't have been such a big screen, view details and versions, it's going to have a link called run. And that's going to pop up an interactive tool. The run button actually works, and I'll get around to showing you that in a second. But first, let's just take a look at what's in it. And hang on, I've got a couple of notes so I don't forget to tell you anything nifty about it. So when I run this flow, the first thing that happens is someone gets prompted on a screen to search for an account by name. And then once they do that, the flow will just go fetch all of the details about that account. And after that, I have a couple of formula field typed variables, one of which is it takes the name of that account and takes the first letter of it and saves that, called account initial. And then the second one returns, pardon me, returns true or false. And it just checks to see if it's in the first half of the alphabet. Does it start with A through M? And so then after my flow has computed that, it starts into branching off how it's going to behave based on some decision computations. So if it is in the first half of the alphabet. If that formula equals true, then it's going to go down the first half branch, and otherwise it'll go down the second half branch. Then it's going to, for the A through M's, it's going to make a decision about, is the account's billing country code the United States? If so, it's going to suggest that maybe the sysadmin would be interested in this account. And otherwise, it'll suggest that the security interest user will be interested in this account. If it was in the second half of the alphabet, it's going to check whether the billing country of the account was in France. And if so, it'll suggest the integration user. And if not, it'll suggest the chatter user. These are the four Salesforce users that come with every Scratch org. So I just made a little 4-decision branch. That way I didn't have to set up too many fake users. And finally, after computing this information, it just, let's see, make this a little smaller. It just puts all these details on a screen and shows them off, including which of the 4 users, the alias of which of the 4 users it thought might be appropriate. So if I run this, and I've got an account sample, and I click next, that one starts with an S. It actually doesn't even have a billing country, which counts as being outside of the US. So it's saying that the chatter user might be interested in that. If I were to go over to the app launcher and do accounts, and I've got sample account for entitlement. Let me just create a new account and I'll call it Hello Demo. And we will put this one in France. And if I go back and I say I want to see some details about Hello Demo, I can see that it starts with an H, which is in the first half of the alphabet, and it's in France, and therefore we are suggesting the security user as an potentially interested party. Does this do anything useful? Not so much, but it actually is built to resemble a very real web page that we had at my last company that was basically a find your sales rep web page. You could punch in where you lived and other various details about yourself. Our decision tree was way, way more complicated than this. But once you finished punching in some stuff about yourself without actually necessarily saying who you were, just speculative stuff like, okay, what if I were like this? It would show you the smiling face and the email address and the phone number of the person who covered the territory that described you. So although it wasn't technically a screen flow, it was something else. This is much like that. It doesn't actually do anything. It just displays information based on what potentially would happen if a person were to be like that. So let's take a look now at another one I built. And in the meantime, let's go back to setup. All right, so that was screen flows. And a second type of flow is called a triggered flow. And these flows, they do things in the background without humans explicitly watching them run in response to one of 3 things: a schedule, like every morning at midnight; data edits, like someone creating, editing, or deleting a contract record; or a slightly advanced concept called a platform event. And again, I built a record triggered flow that runs in response to data edits. So let's just take a look at that one now. We'll go back to flows. All right, so if I do view details of flow number 2 and try to click run, one of the things you'll notice right away is that it refuses to run because, as I said, these are not interactive flows. That's just not what makes them run. So let's go edit it. Okay, I guess I need to hit open. Let's go look at the flow builder and see what does make it run. All right, so you'll notice right away that one thing that's different about this is that its start has conditions. It runs every time I create or update an account. And so it's going to take, again, it's going to do very similar computations. It's going to get the first letter of, instead of us having handpicked a record interactively, it's implied what record made this flow launch because it's the record that we just saved. But again, it's going to get its name, get the first letter, and then it's going to check whether that's in the first half of the alphabet. The decision tree is much the same. I have the same logic of first half, second half, US, France. And if I edit it, the only thing that you'll see is different is instead of the chosen account .billing country code, now it's record .billing country code. And when it finishes, instead of showing it off to whoever's watching, it's going to post a chatter message on that account that says, hey, so-and-so, this seems like your turf. So let's go back and take a look at that in action. I have to activate it. I have to have it open to activate it, don't I? Activate. And now I'm going to go to sample account for entitlements, and I'm going to go to details, and I'll show off chatter. And I can change anything I want. I'll just change this type to a prospect. Sure, why not? Oh, maybe I will actually. It didn't even have a billing country, so let's put it in Albania. All right, so second half of the alphabet, and it's in Albania, and it says, hey, chatter expert, this seems like your turf. If I change it to, say, France, it's going to post yet another chatter thing and say, hey, integration user, this seems like your turf. So that is a record triggered flow. And that again is really similar to one that we had at my last company, only instead of posting chatter messages, we were actually assigning a real owner ID. And yeah, when we started out, we actually had two separate flows, one of which did the logic for showing off the contact, supported the contact page, and another of which supported the owner ID assignment. And they actually each had their own copy of these identical decision branches, which meant that if we needed to change France to Belgium, then we had to go in two different places and do that. Which leads into the third type of flow, and that's called an auto-launched flow. These flows also do computations or Salesforce work in the background without humans explicitly watching them run, but when you create and save one, you don't actually explicitly think about what's going to make it run. You just worry about that later. Maybe one of your developers is going to end up making it run from some Apex code, or you might make it run from some other flow, maybe from a screen flow, maybe from a triggered flow. Believe it or not, you can even run an AutoLaunch flow from another AutoLaunch flow. And running an AutoLaunch flow from another flow is probably the most common, well-known way to run one. And when we decide to do it that way, we refer to the AutoLaunch flow as a subflow of the flow from which we're running it. And this pattern is so common that I have a slightly inaccurate habit of saying subflow when what I actually mean is AutoLaunched flow, because it's shorter and rolls off the tongue better. But technically, while all subflows are auto-launched flows, not all auto-launched flows are destined to be run from other flows, which means they don't all end up as subflows. The main thing to remember is that when you're in the process of building an auto-launched flow, you don't actually have to think in advance about what's going to be responsible for making it run. You just worry about programming what it's going to do when someone does eventually run it. So why do we use subflows or auto-launch flows? But I'm going to say subflow because it's faster. As for me, I have two main reasons. Number one is that I'm pretty minimalist when it comes to visuals. I'm not a big knick-knack person in my home decor. I like to have an empty desk, and I feel like my big complex flows are tidier and easier to read when I break them up into small pieces that are interconnected to each other with some sort of see also cross-reference. Number two, as long as I design an auto-launch flow well, then I can build it once, but run it from many other flows as subflows, which is awesome because then if I need to change the business logic, I only have to edit one auto-launch flow, but the behavior of all of the many flows that run it get updated at the same time. And programmers call these traits modularity, they call them encapsulation. And the idea is that it's like keeping all of your kitchen knives in a dedicated knife block instead of mixing them in with the spoons. Tonight is all about Subflow, but it wouldn't be fair for me to pretend that Subflow is the only tool in Salesforce that lets you encapsulate complicated logic into tidy little boxes. There are lots of other things that Salesforce helps you do, like you can store configuration options elsewhere in Salesforce, like custom metadata, custom settings, custom data tables, or you can install packages into your Salesforce org that just take care of complicated processes for you. Like you can install them from the App Exchange or from unofficial Salesforce.com, or from, you could even make them yourself. That packaging link that I have in the slides that we'll share, that actually goes to one of Salesforce's admin relations experts who talked all about how to make your own packages, and it's actually very easy. So those are other things, but tonight's all about Subflow. So let's get our hands dirty and build one right now. We are going to fundamentally reshape the design of the two that we just saw, which is a process programmers love to make sound fancy by calling it refactoring. But refactoring just means editing your old work after you've learned a new trick. So let's pull up Chrome again. And I am going to open up flow number 2. And I'm going to do a save as and call it a new flow. And I'm going to say demo 03 super subflow. That's probably not actually a realistic enterprise class name for it, but that's what I'm going to call it. In this case, I'm completely changing the flow type, so I need to expand advance and change it to AutoLaunch Flow. I'm going to hit save, and it's going to yell at me saying, but you can't do things like put the word record into an AutoLaunch Flow. And so I'll say, I know, it's fine. So I'll fix that, I promise. So the first thing is I need to, since we're going to call it from elsewhere, we need that elsewhere to have a way of telling it what exactly it wants it to do some computations on. So I think that based on the similarities that I saw in those other two flows, this part right in the middle is what looked a lot alike. There were some subtle differences like record versus get account before the dot of billing country code, but overall they look a lot alike. So I am going to focus on that area. And so I'm going to think, well, they both work with some sort of account. They called it different things, but they work with some sort of account. So I'm going to click new resource and click variable, and my data type is going to be record, and I'm going to choose the account object. And the most important thing is I need to click this available for input outside the flow button, because AutoLaunch Flows need to be told what to do by something else. And I'm just going to give it a really boring API name and call it input account. And then there's one other thing, that computation of the first letter of the account name. I could do it here, but it turns out that I really do need to actually do it sort of outside of the part I'm going to break out, because in that screen flow, we need to, it turns out that I display that to the user. Now, I suppose what I could do is design this to compute it here and maybe return it as an output variable, and that would be a perfectly good design decision, but that's not what I rehearsed for this. So we're not going to do it quite that way. And what I'm going to also do is I'm going to say that I just want to be able to pass a variable of type text and call it input is first half. I'm sorry, not a text. We're just going to take the true false that's already been computed outside of this flow, and we're going to make that something that we can pass into the flow from outside of it. And then I am going to change the suggested user variable that ends up at the very bottom that these all get assigned to. And I'm just going to rename it for clarity to output suggested user. And I'm also going to make sure that it's available for output so that when this flow wraps up, it'll send back up to wherever it came from what user it computed. Now I've got just a couple of things I have to change. I have to change whether this decision, it's not going to be based on my old account initial in first half. I'm going to base it on input is first half. And then I'm going to change this decision. Instead of, there is no such thing as record.billing country code, but that's okay because we have input account dot billing country code. Now I'm going to copy that to my clipboard and go throw it on the other side. And then I can actually do some stuff. I can delete some of these other ones now that they're no longer in use. Let's see. That should be good. And I don't want to post to Chatter. I just want to figure out which user is of interest. All right, and the AutoLaunch flow is already gone, so we should be able to save this as super subflow. Let me take a look at the questions. Is there an issue or a concern if we make the resource for account input variables available for output as well? Is it okay to check both boxes? I am going to say yes, it is. In this case, I'm bringing in an account and I'm sending out a user. And you may need to just do a lot of testing to see if it really works for you. But in general, I would say that it's not necessarily harmful to have both your input and your output be the same one. If you really, really want to be safe that you're not accidentally doing what's known as side effects, where you're changing something and you didn't even realize that your subflow changed it, you can always just sort of copy things, you know, from a text typed input variable to another text typed output variable, and then you can feel really, really safe about what's going on, or again, record typed. But overall, I would say that it's not necessarily inherently a bad thing to save yourself some clutter and check both boxes. That's a good question. All right, so we're going to activate this flow. And now if we go back, let's put it to use. We'll go back to our list of flows and we'll edit demo 01. And we are going to, right above this little decision, which is sort of what we broke out into a subflow, we're going to, sorry, I went through that really fast. I'm going to click plus, and then I'm going to choose subflow. And then I'm going to search for subflows and find demo 3 super subflow. And I'll nickname this element get suggested user. And I have 3 things I need to do here. I need to say, yes, I want to pass it an input variable. And the account that I want to pass it is the account from get account details. And it's going to try to ask me exactly which field, but actually all I have to do is just backspace out that period. And that is a perfectly legitimate thing. I can send the entire account through. Input is first half. That's the Boolean. So let's see, I am looking for account initial in first half of alphabet that I computed out here in demo 01. And I'm going to send that through as well. And then finally, when the output suggested user comes back, I want to save that as suggested user. And again, I need to chop off that little period, and I can save an entire user in a user. It's just that when I click, Salesforce doesn't really make it obvious that it's acceptable to chop off that period. And now I'm going to take this entire decision, delete the entire element, and we're going to go straight through like this. The entire decision is now inside of get suggested user. So let's do a save as new version and see if I did it right. We'll run it. And if we search for hello demo, cross my fingers, it still works exactly the same way as it did before. Cheryl asks, would I have gotten an error message if I hadn't reviewed the period? I think so. Let's just try. I'm going to put it back and hit done. Yes, it would say enter a valid value. Great question. In fact, it even then tried to chop the period off for me. So that's fun. Hey, okay, yay, that works. Good question. All right, and because I love testing, we're just going to make sure that I didn't mess anything up. It still works. Let's also edit demo 2 to use the demo 3 subflow as well. I am going to, again, right above that spot where it most resembles the subflow that we made, I'm going to add a call to a subflow. I'm going to look for demo 3, and again, I think that get suggested user is a great thing to call it. And I need to give it 2 inputs and save 1 output. So in this case, I am looking for record, chop off the dot. And again, I've got my formula field right here that I can send it. And then I want to save it as suggested user, chop off the dot and hit done, hit delete, and hit save as a new version, and make sure that I activate the new version. And let's go back and change. I do not want to open a Google map of France. I just want to put this one in Finland. And it still works. It still says, hey, chatter expert, this seems like your turf. So that's exciting. And now if I go over to demo 03, and my boss has told me, oh my gosh, we don't actually want to do this where we branch on France, we want to branch on Japan. I'm going to leave all the labels as France because I'm being lazy. Save as a new version. And I'm going to activate it. All right, I need to move this. First of all, I'll move it to France, which now should be nothing special, should not be integration user. And sure enough, it says, hey, chatter expert. But if I put it in Japan, it should say, hey, integration user, this seems like your turf. And similarly in the interactive screen flow, if I run it and I look up hello demo, no, I was editing the other one. Sample account for entitlements, I can see that it's suggesting integration user for Japan. So just by editing demo 03, I was able to edit the behavior of both demo 01 and demo 02 at the same time. And they're both really, in my opinion, tidy and easy to read. So how do we know when we have an opportunity to do Subflow? How did I know what to do? I like to follow a principle called dry programming. It stands for don't repeat yourself. And I love that some people also made up that the opposite of dry programming must be wet programming, for write everything twice. And so ways that you can recognize that maybe you have a really great opportunity for a subflow are, number one, if you find yourself copying and pasting either inside of flows or in between flows. Two, if you find yourself hitting save as and then doing a new flow. Or three, if you find that you're doing really complicated decision branches where some of the branches look like carbon copies of the others, that's a really great opportunity. Sometimes I actually take screenshots of my flows and I print them onto paper, and I take my many colors of highlighter and I start circling things that look the same and thinking about whether they would be a good idea to break out into subflows. And again, you don't even have to limit it to just one subflow. You can start putting subflows inside of subflows if that helps you feel organized and like you've got that benefit of write it once, edit it once, it updates everywhere. How to know if you're overdoing dry? Some people think that maybe it's too much to never repeat yourself. And so they have a little bit of a modified, damp programming where they say, it's not the end of the world to write the same thing twice. But if you find yourself writing it 3 times, take a moment, break it out into something like a subflow, and start thinking about whether you've got an opportunity to, yeah, to refactor. So, any questions about Subflow? Because I want to show you some advanced stuff, but this would be a great time to check in if anybody's got questions.
No questions here, Katie. Just want to say looks great so far. If everyone has a question, you can post it in the chat or unmute yourself. And we just took off the video, so the spotlight is on you and you can go on with the conversation.
Fantastic. All right, so we are going to cover, as promised, a concept called application service layers. I learned this several years into programming in Salesforce. Andy Fawcett wrote a book called EnterpriseForce.com Architecture or something like that. And the Salesforce Discord helped me a lot to understand it better. And it was a lot to digest. And in the end, I realized that it really is basically just a couple of tips and tricks when you're already breaking things out into stuff like subflows. And programmers love to write big books about it, but I'm not sure that all of the concepts are being shared with awesome admins, even though we're now programming in Flow. And so I am excited to share just a couple of tips and tricks about what makes a subflow a service. So I am going to go to Super Subflow and I'm going to change it just a little bit. Let's go save it as a new version. And one thing you might notice is that we're still tied down to the idea of it being an account and the idea of working with the billing country code, but accounts also have shipping countries. And you know what else has parts of the world? Contact mailing addresses, they have local addresses, lead addresses, like all sorts of things have addresses. And sure enough, at my old job, we actually did this territory thing. It wasn't so much based on any record type or specific place that your address appeared. It was just we divided up a map of the world, period. And we didn't want it to be Salesforce specific exactly why we had divided up the map of the world. We had that division of the map of the world long before we got Salesforce. It was the concept of that we had divided the map of the world and various other concepts that was reusable, not where we put the details in our database about the fact that someone lived somewhere. So what I'm going to do is make this a little bit more generic, and we're actually going to build it out for contact as well after we do that. So I am going to go back over to my variables, and I'm realizing that the only thing that I really use from that account is its billing country, which is a piece of text. So I'm going to do a text type variable, and I'm going to call it input country, and that makes it way more generic. And I'm going to make it available for input. Going to hit done. And now I'm going to change this one to be from input account dot billing country code to just be input, does the input country equal US? And over here, I'm going to change it again from input account dot billing country code just to input country. And I'm also going to change it back to France because I still have my branches named France and the disconnect is just really bothering me. All right, so now that I've done that, it turns out that I don't even actually need this input account variable anymore. So I'm going to hit save. And again, input is first half. I already decided that I was going to break that out and take it literally and not try to compute it from an account, which is great now. I'm really happy about that decision because now we're just going to let sort of the thing that actually knows the context of whether it's working with an account or a contact or even something that isn't stored in Salesforce. It's just a web page with an interactive wizard. All of these input facts, they're not tied to Salesforce specific concepts. They're just texts and true false values. I'm going to go ahead and leave output still as a user, but if I were building something that did stuff outside of Salesforce too, like that contact us web page, I actually might decide that I'd rather return that as a couple of output variables, like maybe just a piece of text with the output email address and another piece of text with a link to the image of that user or that kind of thing. In this case, my demo is completely inside of Salesforce, so we're just going to stick with simplicity, and we're going to stay with a user typed output variable. But the broader you start thinking, I will say that sometimes it helps to change your outputs from a record typed variable to plain old text or plain old numbers or plain old true falses as well. So we're going to hit save, and we're going to activate this version. And now I have to go over and reload demo 01 and demo 02 in my web browser. And let's see, should have a, well, it looks like I never actually activated that version, so I can still just edit it. All right, so we're going to go back over to Subflow in demo 01. This is our screen flow, and it's going to say, hey, wait a minute, you're having me send something over to a demo 03 input variable called the input account, but there is no such thing. And I'm going to say, I know, I changed it, and I'm just going to delete it. And now I'm going to flip this one on, and I'm going to have to go to, what am I on? I'm demo 01, not that. Where did it go? Account from get account details dot billing country code. I'm going to hit done, and I'll hit save. And when I hit run, it should work. Please, demo magic, work. Yes, it still works. And Japan, since I changed it back to France being the integration user, is back to chatter. Let's go, let's activate this one just for good measure. And then I am going to take O2, which I actually did remember to activate earlier. And so now I have to do a save as. And it's already warning me, hey, input account isn't a variable anymore, so you probably need to deal with that. And I'm thinking, good timing, that's exactly what I was going to do. So I'm just going to delete it and say, yes, I understand that I don't need to pass anything to a non-existent input variable anymore. But now I need to do record dot billing country code as the input country plain old text. And hit done and hit save and hit activate. And I'm going to edit this record, just change anything, it doesn't really matter what. And again, this is in Japan in the second half of the alphabet, which now is chatter experts. So we get the chatter thing saying, hey, this seems like your turf. Let's do what I promised and create a brand new flow. Actually, I think I'll do a save as from here. Demo, what did I call this? Demo 04, suggest chat with suggested contact handler. And it's still a record triggered flow, so nothing to change under advanced. And I am going to change it from being triggered on account to contact. But it's probably not going to be too happy with me if I try to do record.billing country code, because turns out that contacts don't have billing countries. I need to do mailing. Where is it? There's record. Mailing country code or something like that. And I also need to go over into my variables, and the records don't have names when they're contacts, they have last names. And this is probably also, these are badly named variables now, so let's just fix that. We're going to call it last name initial, and we're going to rename this one to be last initial in first half of alphabet. And you can see it already figured out to catch up to this renaming of the variable I did. Flow is pretty great that way. And similarly in our subflow, as soon as I renamed that variable, it was like, oh, you mean this. So that's nifty. And I'm going to hit save and activate. And if I'm lucky, I should have some good luck, some demo magic. And I'm gonna, let's go back to France just to watch it actually change. And we get, hey, integration user, this seems like your turf. Wait, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. What we activated was demo 04. We already saw that work. So let's go over to contact and create a new person, Testy Matesterson. And hit save. And we go to chatter. And I forgot to put in a country, but that actually counts as just not in the US. And this is the first half of the alphabet because of this M right here. And sure enough, it figured out, hey, security user, this seems like your turf. Security user is what happens when you're first half outside the USA. So this now works on contacts too. And if I were to change this, now I have demo 1, demo 2, and demo 4 that would all update. And I wouldn't have to change this 3 times. I only have to change it 1 time. So that is the essence of what makes a Subflow a service. Not all auto-launched flows are inherently following the programming pattern known as a service. And that's okay. It really is okay to use Subflow and not make it a service. A cake can be really tasty without being a strawberry cake. But if you find that you might be able to get sort of a superpower boost, if you think of it this way, this service pattern, the way you do it is you just make sure that your subflow doesn't make any assumptions about exactly how it's going to be called. You already didn't make an assumption about whether it would be called from Apex, from another flow, etc. Now you're going to go one step further. First thing is never edit data inside the subflow. We already did that actually just when we built Subflow. You'll notice that I didn't post to chatter inside the Subflow. Again, that's what's known as a side effect. You really want to make sure that you don't have what's known as side effects, because in the case of the screen flow, that's a read-only use. And so I don't want to do something that writes data for what turns out to be a read-only use. When people are visiting our website saying, who would my sales rep be? They're not actually saving any data about themselves into Salesforce. They just want to poke around and see. And so there is nothing to save into Salesforce. So making sure that the subflow leaves the actual editing of data to whatever the next level up is. And you can have a subflow that saves data, but make sure that sort of that bottom layer doesn't save data if you want it to be a service. Number 2 is avoid record typed input variables, because again, you might want to expand it to work with more kinds of records. You might want to expand it to just work with people filling out forms on the web that don't use records at all. There's a lot of different ways that that the data might come in. And so sticking to just plain old text, number, Boolean for true, false, that kind of thing is way more service-ish when it comes to how you structure your subflows. And number 3, always make sure that there's at least one output variable. You can have more than one output variable, but again, sort of going back to number 1, you don't want your service flavored subflow to actually do meaningful work. It's more like it should be like a formula field. It should just do some computations and give an answer, but it shouldn't like make stuff happen out on the side elsewhere behind the scenes. And so taking the answer to whatever it computed and sending it back up to whatever made it run through an output variable is super important for a service flavored subflow. And Cheryl, I'll put in the chat, it is a service flavored subflow is for the concept of application service layer. And a bunch, when you make a bunch of subflows that are all designed like services, and they kind of operate at the same level of making your automations happen. Sometimes people call that an application service layer. You don't have to call it that, but if you want to look up more about it, that's what you can find. And so some of the benefits of a service flavored subflow are that you can, again, you can reuse an auto launch flow in more kinds of subflow or outside of flow altogether. Like it could be a lead, a contact, an account, or it could even be completely outside of Salesforce altogether. And then number two, I think that once you get used to it, it helps you think again in those sort of little compartmentalized, I have a knife block, it's only for knives kinds of ways. And I think that sometimes it makes testing easier. I have just one thing I have to test to think, does this logic suggest the correct user for the second half of the alphabet, France? And then I have a different flow that worries about whatever the answer is. Okay, presuming we have the right answer, does this flow post a value to chatter? Or whatever the answer is this value displayed beautifully and in the correct color in a screen flow? I like to not have to test all of that at the same time, but to trust that one part works and just focus on testing the other part. So that is some tips about Subflow. I hope that that helped show off what Subflow is good for. Again, tidiness and getting to edit things just in one place. And my two takeaways are for your very first Subflow, think about dry programming. Don't repeat yourself. And just look for things that look the same or places where you copy pasted to make it happen. And then if you want to go a little bit more advanced, you can start playing with the idea of editing some of your existing subflows to be more like service flavored subflows and making it so that they're even more generic than they already are and can be used a little bit more broadly than they already can.